Late, you guys. I'm sorry to keep you waiting. I was working with the president on something, and he wanted me to hand this out to you all, and I have it here, so I want to read it to the American public directly from the president. It has been suggested that we should rename as many as 10 of our legendary military bases, such as Fort Bragg
The volume's
in North
really
Carolina,
low. That's C-SPAN,
Fort
guys.
Hood in Texas, Fort Benning in Georgia, and the
Hold
list
on,
goes
I'm
on.
going to see if I can get it better on
These
Fox.
monumental and very powerful bases have become part of a great American
we're gonna
heritage
switch over to
and
Fox.
a history
One
of
moment,
winning,
guys.
victory, and
Winning victory. Hold on. Fox should be louder for us. Give me a second.
HBO brings it back. Officials say it'll be with a discussion
Cops.
of
They
historical
canceled Cops.
context. Here to weigh in. We're going to get Dave Rubin soon
Don't
after
weigh
the
in.
briefing.
Here we go.
Here's
Let's
the
go to
briefing.
KK Macaroni. Here we
Macaroni
go.
at the White
Live
House.
stream.
in North
Welcome.
Carolina, Fort
Hey, Kim.
Hood in Texas, Fort Benning in Georgia, and the list goes on. These monumental and very powerful
Daniel.
bases have become part of a great American heritage and a history of winning, victory, and freedom. The United States of America trained and deployed our heroes here and won 2 world wars. Therefore, my administration will not even consider the renaming of these magnificent and fabled military installations. Our history as the greatest nation in the world will not be tampered with. Respect our military. So that was directly from the president. We spent some time working on that, and I wanted to deliver that to you. Also, I wanted to take us through a few other things relating to the coronavirus. First, the coronavirus task force briefing was held yesterday. I was in it, and there was some very good news that I'd like to share with you. I don't know if you all saw, there were 2 studies that came out, very strong studies in the journal Nature. And in Europe,
studies.
which had a very similar epidemic profile to the United States, 3.1 million lives were saved due to mitigation and the efforts taken by the European governments. And as Dr. Birx noted to me, she sent this to me just before I walked out here, she said it suggests that the United States also prevented over 3 million deaths, thanks to the efforts of President Trump and the American people. Another study found that the shutdown efforts prevented 50 million additional coronavirus cases. So those are 2 very encouraging studies underscoring the work of the American people.
So let's end the
Also,
shutdowns.
the Washington Post noted that these 2 reports use completely different methods to reach similar conclusions. They suggest that the aggressive and unprecedented shutdowns were effective at halting the exponential spread of the novel coronavirus.
Great,
So thank
let's
you,
end them.
Washington Post, for that good reporting. The Department of Agriculture, Secretary Sonny Perdue, also had some very good news in the task force briefing I was at yesterday. America's meatpacking facilities, at one time it looked like they were going to need to close. That was unacceptable to the administration. So
Some
we
of them
took
did.
action. The coronavirus task force took action. And now I'm pleased to report that these meatpacking facilities are operating at 95% capacity compared to 2019. We have beef operating at 98% capacity, pork at 95%, and poultry at 98%. Throughout America's extraordinary
numbers
efforts
aren't
to slow the
poultry.
spread, President Trump ensured that the meat supply chain stayed functional and robust by directing these meatpacking facilities to safely operate in accordance with the CDC and OSHA guidelines. His efforts secured America's continual access to a steady food supply chain. And then finally, and very importantly, I have some great data points to share on coronavirus testing capacity in minority communities. Admiral Brett Joie shared this with me yesterday
This is gonna be
and
all
last
about
night as well. He
minorities, this
said
hearing.
that when we look at testing sites, President Trump's public-private partnership and with
Jenny.
retail companies has proven quite successful. Testing sites are operating in 49 states, with 70% of these sites located in communities with moderate to high social vulnerabilities. And social vulnerability takes into account race, ethnicity, housing and economics, language barriers, and other factors. Also, federally qualified health centers, their FQHCs, serve 29 million patients in 12,000 communities across the nation. They provide care to 1 in 5 of those uninsured, 1 in 5 of rural Americans, 1 in 3 of individuals below the poverty line, and more than 1.3 million homeless men and women, and nearly 1 million
Sounds
migrant
like we need
agricultural
universal
workers. And
insurance.
92% of these FQHCs now offer COVID tests, and we've awarded them $583 million to 1,385 of these facilities. And finally, I promised my last announcement. The HHS Office of Minority Health issued a competitive funding opportunity to build a strategic network of national, state, territory, tribal, local, and community-based organizations that deliver vital health information and support linkages to services for racial and ethnic minorities. And this announcement, this network is scheduled to be awarded at the end of June and is expected to reach at least 40 million individuals from racial and ethnic minorities. These updates, I was told by Brett Joie, were received very well at the Senate hearings. And we thank the Vice President, Mike Pence, for doing an amazing job leading our coronavirus task force, and to President Trump, who has led in bringing America through the coronavirus pandemic. And with that,
And
I'll take
failed to
questions.
test for the first 6 weeks, so we have
Thank you so much.
100,000 dead.
Does the president regret tweeting out a baseless conspiracy theory about a 75-year-old protester on the morning of George Floyd's funeral?
The
That's his
president was
brand.
asking questions about an interaction in a video clip he saw, and the president has the right to ask those questions.
But does he regret tweeting out this protester was assaulted?
The president does not regret standing up for law enforcement men and women across this country. And let me say this, and just give you a little bit about the mindset behind the president's tweet. Look, we're living in a moment that is, it seems to be reflexively anti-police officer.
Just a reminder, he claimed that a 75-year-old man faked falling down and bleeding out of his ear. But no regrets. YOLO.
And it's unacceptable to the president. In this tweet that he sent out, he was in no way condoning violence. He was not passing judgment on these two officers in particular. But what he was saying is this: when we see a brief snippet of a video, it's incumbent upon reporters and those who are surveying the situation to ask questions. Rather,
Upon the president to have facts before he tweets anything out. He's the president of the United States.
the president did have facts before he tweeted it out that undergirded his
Baseless
questions.
conspiracy theory. Do
It's
you
not a
acknowledge
baseless
that?
conspiracy. No, not at all. I won't acknowledge that because
It's
look,
OAN. It's
you had,
absolutely
let's contrast
baseless.
this to the George Floyd situation, which that horrific
Oh,
video
yes.
that we all saw.
Yeah.
Every single police officer that I saw across the country came out and said, this is an inexcusable action, and I condemn this police officer. In this case, there were 57 police officers who said, I resign in protest over the way these two officers were handled. And the president says those law enforcement officers have a right to be heard.
But does the president
John.
think that anything justifies that 75-year-old man being pushed down to the ground like we all saw?
The
in
president
video?
does not condone violence. He wants to see the appropriate amount of police force used in any given situation,
questioned
including this
the
one.
fall.
But he believes that the officers
He
have a right
thinks
to be
that
heard.
it was
George
faked.
Floyd's brother is here testifying. Has the White House invited him here to meet with the president?
The president has repeatedly acknowledged George Floyd, his passing, the egregiousness of that atrocity, and has called the family by phone, as he did last week. Yes.
The president has got an event tomorrow in Dallas at a church in which he'll meet with faith leaders. He'll also meet with law enforcement officials, small business owners. The theme is a plan for holistic revitalization and recovery. Will the president be announcing any policy in regards to police reform tomorrow, and what might that policy form?
Yeah, so that's a very important question. And as it stands currently, the president has spent the last 10 days quietly and diligently working on proposals to address the issues that the protesters have raised across the country, legitimate issues. And that body of work, I'm told, is reaching its final edits, and we hope to produce it for you in the coming days. I can't promise you it's tomorrow, but in the coming
John
days,
does have a
we
mask.
look to deliver that.
What
He's
then
just
will
not wearing
tomorrow
it.
be
He's 6
about?
feet
Will
away
it be a
from people.
listening session as he had on Monday with law enforcement, or might there actually be some concrete policy proposals?
Yeah, it will be a round.
It could at least be done at the executive level.
It will be a roundtable, much like what you saw with law enforcement officers earlier in the week.
And if I could just stay on that theme for a second, in terms of reform ideas that the president could support, Democrats have floated some in the House. Senate Republicans, led by Tim Scott, are working on others, things like banning chokeholds, banning no-knock warrants, independent process to investigate misconduct. Could the president
can't
support issues like that?
So again, don't want to get ahead of the announcements. What I would say is each issue is being looked at as to what would make a difference. Everything that you've suggested has certain ramifications, so he has to look at each of these in great detail as he's done over the last few days. And I would just note one thing that AG Barr said was that in the Democrat bill, they talked about needing to reduce immunity
Democratic.
to go after bad cops, but that would result in police pulling back. So that is one thing that is a non-starter.
So is that, it's called qualified immunity.
Yes.
Is that a red line for the president?
That's a non-starter in the Democrat legislation. Yes, John.
Does the president believe there's a problem with institutional racism in this country and institutional racism in law enforcement?
We'll
Look,
talk
I've answered
about,
this question. I think this is
qualified
the
immunity
fourth
later.
time I've been asked it, and I've said each and every time, there are injustices that we have seen. Clearly, that tape of George Floyd was inexcusable, gut-wrenching, difficult to watch, and it was really a beautiful funeral yesterday, all the great testimonies to his life. We recognize those injustices. Sandra Bland, another example. But this president knows fundamentally that most police officers in this country are good, that the 750 men and women that have been injured, that David Dorn, the police officer who was killed, and Patrick Underwood, the law enforcement officer who was killed, are emblematic of what police in this country stand for. That is the best, that is the brightest, and that is our domestic heroes. Yes.
The reason why I'm asking it now is, does he believe that action needs to be taken to fundamentally change the way law enforcement is done in this country, to make fundamental changes so that there isn't the kind of disparities that we see along racial lines?
Well, the president's looking at various proposals, and I would say this president has done a whole lot more than Democrats have ever done when it comes to rectifying injustices, where you had the crime bill of the 90s, which created great racial disparities in our justice system, and President Trump rectified some of those with the First Step Act. So President Trump's about action, and he's shown
Democrats
that,
have been
and he
trying to change
recognizes
those for years
injustices
in
and
the
acts
Senate,
promptly when he
led
sees
by
them.
Mitch McConnell.
Yes.
Thanks, Billy.
It's 100% that,
agree
Mitch.
with the recent announcements from the Marines and Navy about their policies banning the display of the Confederate flag.
So I haven't spoken to him on that specific one. He does, as I noted at the top of this briefing, fervently stand against the renaming of our forts, these great American fortresses where literally some of these men and women who lost their lives as they went out to Europe and Afghanistan and Iraq and all across this world to win world
Some
wars
of
on
those
behalf of
bases
freedom. A
named
lot of
after
times the very last
Confederate
place they
heroes
saw
that
was one
had
of these
slaves.
forts. And to suggest that these forts were somehow inherently racist and their names need to be changed is a complete disrespect
Well, you know,
to the men and women who the last
slave
bit of
owners.
American land they saw before they went overseas and lost their lives were these forts.
Not about them.
So an expert
damn
appointed
Colin
to review the
Kaepernick
Clinton
naming
case,
bases.
said the Justice Department has engaged in highly irregular conduct to benefit a political ally of the president, and he urged the presiding judge in the case to deny attempt by the government to dismiss the charges. What is the White House reaction?
That's the first I'm hearing of that. I'd point you to DOJ on that. Jeff.
Thanks, Gailey. Congressional Republicans, including Congresswoman Liz Cheney, have criticized the president's decision to reduce the number of U.S. troops in Germany. Some saying that it will embolden Russia if the United States does that. Did the president make that decision to punish Chancellor Merkel for deciding not to come to the G7 in June?
Look, I have no announcement on that front, and he never makes decisions to punish certain world leaders. He acts in the best interest of the United States.
Just
Yes.
follow up on another issue on
Yes.
Kristen's with regard to the tweet. One of the things that the president said in his tweet was that the gentleman fell harder than he was pushed. How does that work in terms of physics?
Look, the president raised several questions based on a report he saw. He has a right to ask those questions.
That
and
wasn't
where
a
he
question.
stands is squarely with law enforcement. He was making no judgments, not condoning violence, not saying what happened in this case with these two officers was right or wrong. But he's standing back and saying we need to ask questions before we destroy lives and convict people in the court of public opinion. Yes.
Thanks, Kelly. Two questions on the
I
economy.
watched.
First of all,
He
both
fell
the chair of the
harder
Federal
than was
Reserve and
pushed.
Steve Mnuchin said today the U.S. will definitely need another round of stimulus. How urgent is that for the president? I mean, how soon do we expect him to meet with Democrats to discuss the next legislation?
Yeah, it's a good question. He met on a potential Phase 4 policy last week. It was a very promising discussion with his economic advisors. So that's in the works as to when and if we see that, but it is a topic of discussion. He was encouraged by the jobs report. We were supposed to lose 7.5 million jobs. We ended up gaining 2.5 million, a swing by 10 million. It was described to me as one of the, by one famed economist, as one of the worst miscalculations of economists in history to be off by 10 million. That's the size of Michigan. So the president's encouraged because what we're seeing is a belief in the Trump economy and the Trump presidency. What we're seeing is the market soar. We're seeing the S&P have its best 50-day track record in history because they believe in a president that has free market policies that got us to the hottest economy in modern history and will get us there again. Yes.
On that, the Federal Reserve today offered a pretty grim economic outlook, saying unemployment is going to be elevated for years. And also this week, we heard from the National Bureau of Economics research saying that the U.S. officially entered a recession. What is the White House response to that?
We believe that next
Thank
month's
you, Stephanie.
jobs report will be robust. The president has been clear that Q4, he expects Q3 to be a transition period, Q4 to be robust, and next year to be
I'll
a very
repeat what I
hot
was
year. And
saying
I would
there.
note that those in the prediction business, they were off by 10 million. That's not too good. So I'd go back and look at some of the
I was
models
just
that
saying
were
that
off and
nobody
how
got new
extraordinary the jobs
jobs.
report
We
was
lost
last time, including
300,000
new
jobs.
jobs for Black Americans.
These are
Yes.
2.7
Thank you so
million
much.
people going back to jobs they
The
already
president
had
met with
that were
Mitch
on pause
McConnell
because
today,
the
we
coronavirus.
understand. Can you kind of fill us in on what that discussion was about? Any updates?
So
And
I
as
have
you
no
guys know,
announcements on that front.
I
Those
totally
were his
expected that to
private
happen.
meetings, so no announcements out of that.
I don't understand why any
to
economists were
Jonathan's
surprised by
question,
this.
you know, a lot of people are concerned that there is, you mentioned justice disparities. There's a lot of concern of some Americans that police officers treat black individuals and people of color differently than white individuals. Does the president share those specific concerns?
Here's what he's concerned about. He's concerned about what and I've told you he's
he
addressed
fixed it.
injustices with Sandra Bland and George Floyd and has repeatedly acknowledged that. But here is, in addition to that, his concern, put very well by New York's Police Benevolent Association President Mike O'Meara. Our legislators are failing us. Our press is vilifying us. He's saying us as police officers, stop treating us like animals and thugs. We've been vilified, and it's disgusting. When you have a sitting Congressman,
And
Ilhan
we
Omar,
kill
calling
a lot of
cops
people.
cancer, what do you think that leads to?
Two
The AP
people in Los
reported on a
Angeles
shooting
last
in
week,
front of a
another
police
person
department
this
today in
week.
California. Let's stop vilifying our officers. Let's recognize injustice where we see it, but recognize all of us in here are safe because of our police officers doing their job each and every day.
I understand that, but there are concerns among many Americans that people of color are not treated the same by police, and that is what many of the protests have been about. Does the president share those specific concerns?
The president believes most of our police officers are good, hardworking men and women,
okay.
like David Dorn, who was killed among these riots, like Patrick Underwood, who was killed among these riots. Those are our
Completely
police
the
officers.
opposite of the
They
question.
are our best.
Literally
They
the
are our
opposite
brightest.
answer.
They're absolute places of injustice. We're addressing those. We're looking at legislative proposals and EOs, and what ultimately is determined, we'll see in the
Executive
coming
orders.
days as to what will work as a policy prescription. But stop vilifying our officers because they deserve better than that. They're out there. They're working hard. 750
Okay, but
injured
there's
just in the
systemic
last week and a
racism.
half.
That's
and we
been
need to
proven
recognize
with
that.
studies.
Yes.
Back on the Buffalo protester,
Yes.
is the president disappointed that more Republicans have not lined up to support the questions he asked, to use your characterization of it, which many people also characterize it as a conspiracy theory? And secondly, has the president reached out either to the injured gentleman or to the police officers involved?
So first of all, President Trump, I would say, he's not focused on what Republicans are saying or not saying on the Hill. He's focused on making changes. As I said, he's been diligently hard at work the last 10 days, and that is where his focus squarely lies at the moment. Yes.
Thanks, Kelly. And has he reached out to either the gentleman or the...
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Consider it?
Not that I'm aware of. Hello. Yes.
You started this briefing reading off some statistics about success of mitigation efforts on the spread of COVID, but we're now seeing a spike in cases in more than a dozen states and increased hospitalizations in a lot of those as well. So, and many public health experts attribute these spikes to Memorial Day weekend gatherings and other aspects of the reopening process before these mass protests. So why is President Trump continuing to urge reopening given this trend, and should we be slowing down a little bit on the reopening process as we see cases spike?
First, let me know as it pertains to Memorial Day. A week ago today, the vice president's team told me, I wasn't in task force that day, but that it was said that in fact that there was no linkage to Memorial Day as being some point of spurring wild outbreaks and rises across the nation.
Like that?
What I would
Let's
say
take a look.
though, I
This is
talked to
North
Dr.
Carolina.
Birx, and she said what we've seen is that in general,
that?
April
Like that?
averaged out to be about 30,000
like
cases
this.
a day. May was about 25,000
That's
cases a day.
North
Currently,
Carolina.
we're at around 20,000
North Carolina.
cases a day.
These
and
are
we've got to look
hospitalizations,
in a
which would be
nuanced way at each of
backdated
these
to about
states. Like,
Memorial Day.
for instance,
So-
Texas is one of the places
It's all
where they're saying
imaginary.
we're seeing a steady slope, not a huge rise, but part of it's in due to the fact that they're testing in long-term care facilities and in prisons, and the more testing you do, the more cases you identify.
Hospitalizations.
Can I ask a follow-up? President Trump is planning to restart campaign rallies within the next few weeks. What sort of precautions is he going to be taking at his rallies for the safety of the rally goers?
So we have no rallies announced just yet. You're right about the 2-week timeline that was put forward. But we will ensure that everyone who goes is safe, but no specific announcements on that front. And I would direct you to the campaign for more information on that. Yes.
Yes. Thanks for taking my question. Owen Jensen with EWTN News. We've seen thousands of people in the streets protesting, exercising their constitutional right, those, of course, doing it peacefully. At the same time, churches in many cases told to limit their gatherings, in some cases to 10 or no more. Does the president see a double standard there, constitutionally speaking? And if, can you explain, please?
There are absolute double standards that we've seen, and that's why the Justice Department
Catholic
set up
reporter.
a task force, if you will, or a group to look at civil liberties as during coronavirus
EWTN.
shutdowns. I read about one case where you had an allowance of outside gathering and protest, but indoor churches could not gather, even with socially distanced protocols. He absolutely sees an issue. There have been several cases pointed to where people attending church in their cars were targeted by law enforcement officers. So
Has anyone
that's
seen that? Has
unacceptable.
anyone seen anybody
People should be allowed to
arrested in their
worship. We have
car for
First
going to
Amendment in this
church in their
country.
car?
There's a way to safely do it. I went to Mass and was able to safely attend distance from people, and there were appropriate protocols that were taken in that case, and that's what we hope to see, as the President made eminently clear a few weeks ago.
And that, not too long ago, he asked for all churches to reopen. Is he happy with the progress or no?
He's happy with the progress. I've seen, in fact, that very week, a church that I visited reopened, a church down the road from me. So I think he gave a lot of courage to the faith community to reopen, to do so safely. And look, here we are, I think 4 weeks later, and we haven't been hearing about, rampant outbreaks in places of worship. The First Amendment's a beautiful thing. People have a right to go to church or mosque or synagogue.
There's been spread at churches. Does she not read the news?
The president seems pretty unconcerned so far about November and the COVID situation, whether people are going to be afraid to go to the polls or whether there's going to be a lot of delays because of the COVID. He recently said it's a long way off, I think meaning that the pandemic would have died down by then, essentially. But given that it hasn't actually gone away, people are obviously still dying every day and there are some spikes, and it's not that far away, 5 months. Are any measures being taken at all to guarantee that this election is going to go smoothly and everyone who wants to vote can vote?
Yeah, well, I've not seen much criticism of the protest and socially distance and mitigation efforts. I think there's a way to safely vote if you can safely protest, and that's what the president would like to see. There's a way to safely vote. There's a way to safely go to church, and you're asking a hypothetical about something 5 months from now at a time, ironically, when the media hasn't expressed much outrage about a lack of mitigation efforts taken by some of the protesters.
Raquel, opposite of a hypothetical. Are they saying there won't be an election?
Is the president concerned the protest could lead to another outbreak of coronavirus? And a second question, President Trump said that he does not believe the death toll in coronavirus cases figures from some countries. Does he trust the figure from Brazil? Is the White House concerned that the Brazilian government is hiding information about COVID-19?
So I haven't spoken to him about the Brazil numbers, but I have heard him on several cases, probably at least 5, mention that he'd seen what's going on in Brazil, and he was hurt to see how many people have been affected by COVID down there. So he has mentioned Brazil specifically. I believe he even sent some ventilators to Brazil because we had such an overflow of ventilators here because America really, under the leadership of President Trump, snapped into action and shored up what was supposed to be a ventilator shortage and delivered. This administration delivered. So I would just note that he's mentioned great concern for the people of Brazil.
Kaylee, just the first question that I asked, is the president concerned the protests could lead to another outbreak of coronavirus?
And we're monitoring that. Right now we're encouraged to see that cases have declined month over month, but the vice president, as I walked out here, said the task force is well aware of monitoring individual situations in particular states.
Literally been 4 months.
Niels.
There's no long-term trend when you have 4.
Going back to where you started with the statement about renaming the military bases, if Congress were to send over her, say, the defense authorization, with
I mean,
language
hypothetical
that
is a
were to rename
hypothetical.
one of
She
these
just called a
bases
reality
for
a
someone
hypothetical.
who,
That's
say,
the opposite
was
of
a
reality.
general who won the Civil
Hypothetical.
War, would the president veto the defense authorization?
The president
I'm
will
sorry
not
to
be
disappoint you,
signing
B-Dog, but hey, keep
legislation
chatting, 'cause
that
I
renames
get money when
America's
you chat.
forts. It's important to note, Fort Bragg, for example,
plus,
it's
you're
one of the
abusing the hell out of
largest
us.
military installations. It's home to tens of thousands of brave American soldiers. And when you think of Fort Bragg,
And if we
think
rename
of
it, those
the
Americans
brave
won't be
soldiers
brave
that
anymore.
deployed from there. We think of all 5 World War II airborne divisions, the 82nd, the 101st, the 11th, the 13th, and the 17th, all trained at Fort Bragg. The 555th Parachute Infantry Battalion, this was the first black parachute battalion trained at this fort. We must recognize the sacrifices made by these men and women, some of whom saw Fort Bragg for the last time before they went overseas. We've got to think of the Fort Bragg soldiers that have led humanitarian operations like in Hurricane Katrina and the earthquake in Haiti. We've got to honor what has happened there, not rename it. So that is an absolute non-starter for the president. And I would also note...
One more question on that.
Yeah, John.
One more question on that. General David Petraeus is one of those people who went through Fort Bragg a number of times, even though his first command was at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. He penned a quite lengthy and detailed editorial about the reasons why those bases should be renamed, saying it's ironic that American soldiers and Marines are being trained at bases named for people who fought against the Union back in the Civil War, that many of the people for whom these bases
Against
are named
America.
were leaders held in questionable regard, but who were elevated during the Lost Cause movement. He goes on to say, we do not live in a country to which Braxton Bragg, Henry L. Bang, or Robert E. Lee can serve as an inspiration. What does the White House say to that particular point of
Fort
view?
Bragg is known for the heroes within it that trained there, that deployed from
They
there.
would still
and it's
be
an
heroes
insult to
if we-
say to
if
the
we
men and
stopped
women who
calling
left there,
it
the last
after
thing they
a
saw
sugar
on American
plantation
soil
slave
before
owner,
going overseas,
all those
and in some
soldiers would
cases
be
losing
just as
their
heroic.
lives, to tell them that what they left was inherently a racist institution because of a name. That's unacceptable
No, just
to
the
the
name.
president, and
Just the
rightfully
name is
so.
racist.
And I would also note, where do you draw the line here? I'm told that
Slave owners?
no longer can you find on HBO Gone with the Wind because somehow that is
silly.
now offensive. Where do you
That's
draw the line?
ridiculous.
Is it, should George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and James Madison be erased from history? What about FDR and because of internment camps? Should he be erased from history, or Lyndon Johnson, who has
No,
a history
it's not going to be
of
erased from history.
documented
The
racist
Wikipedia page
statements?
is still
And
going to be there.
Finally, what about people
Just
that are
don't
alleged by
have
the media
military
to be
bases
segregationists?
named after guys who fought
NBC
against
tells
the
us
United
Joe Biden
States.
didn't just compromise with segregationists. He fought for their causes in schools, experts say. CNN tells us letters from Joe Biden reveal how he sought support of segregationists in the fight against busing. Washington Post tells us that Biden's tough talk on 1970s schools desegregation plans could get him new scrutiny, and there are several more where that came from. So I'll leave you with the question, should we then rename the Biden Welcome Center? Thanks very much, guys.
I saw Joe Biden fall, and it was harder than he should have fallen.
So there it was, 20 minutes from the White House briefing room. The
That's
headline
true.
dealing with
All right.
police reforms. The White House saying to stop vilifying the police. We expect to hear from the president this week about what ideas he would
This
support.
week.
That could come tomorrow in Dallas.
So it's now been 9 days since President Trump answered any reporter's questions. And earlier today, I don't know if you saw it, but I tweeted about it. Kayleigh McEnroe on Fox and Friends said that the president gave an entire speech about George Floyd. He didn't. He's mentioned George Floyd, hasn't answered any questions about George Floyd, except, Mr. President, what are you going to do about racism? And his response was, a good economy. That's the plan. A great country. Great country. So, yeah, I mean, none of the people after whom these military bases are named are still alive. They're not going to be crushed because their names are taken off a military base. I mean, is it the most important thing in the world? No. But should anybody be offended? I mean, what a snowflake. This guy, let's see, Braxton Bragg died in 1876. Oh, the vapors, if they take his name off of... because the soldiers in World War II went to fight Germany, so if we rename the base, then Germany wins. And then the Nazis are back in power again. I don't know what's going on with my... Oh, now my hand, too. I'm disappearing. I'm fading away. Okay, guys. Hey, if you'd like to support this kind of thing, then please do. KevinLeeFather.com. Noel, good to see you again. It's been a couple of days. B-Dog. Oh, yeah, we have a B-Dog in here. Keep removing Confederate stuff, and there will be no evidence of slavery. No, B-Dog, we have things called books. Hold on. I think I actually have one. I'm going to show you what they're like. Stay right where you are, B-Dog. Don't go anywhere. Okay. Okay. Hold on, everybody. I have something for B-Dog. Okay. So, this is a book about my great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather. B-Dog, I hope you're still here. You haven't given up yet. This was my great-great-great-great-grandfather, Roger Williams. See? He founded Rhode Island, okay? And how do we know he did that? Well, because, look, there's words about Roger Williams. See? There's picture, words, and all sorts of stuff about Roger Williams. Started off in Massachusetts, and then he moved and he established Rhode Island. He established Providence, founded Rhode Island, and was eventually banished because he was anti-slavery. So that's my bloodline. One of the original Americans. My great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great. But the reason that I know about what my great-great-great-great-great-great-great, you can see the resemblance, what he did is because we have books and we have history. And there are many parks, apparently, in Rhode Island named after Roger Williams. And if they took his name off of one of those parks, I'm not sure why they would, but let's just say, I'm sure, I'm not going to fact check this, but I'm absolutely 100% positive at some point, Roger Williams something or other in Rhode Island has been changed to an apartment building or whatever has replaced whatever Roger Williams' name was on. No problem. I still have this. I still know what happened because we study things like that, guys. Yeah, Roger Williams was very cool. Roger was a Baptist minister, but he strongly believed in separation of church and state. He learned 4 native languages. He thought that the white man could cooperate with the native people at the same time that William Amherst was giving out smallpox lace blankets. So, not all white people are terrible. I don't know. Maybe he was. Maybe he died of syphilis. I have no idea. But not that you're terrible if you have syphilis, Chris. I don't even know if Chris is in here. I don't know why I pick on Chris. I mean, you'd think for 38 cents a year he'd buy my love, but yeah, so what if the statues disappear? We don't learn any history from statues. How many people actually go up to a statue and say like, I need to know more about this individual, and then read the plaque, and then they understand history from a plaque? No, that's absolutely ridiculous. You know, be like Germany being full of statues of Hitler. No, there are no statues of Hitler in Germany. Okay, you can fact check that. I don't know if there are or not, but I have been to Germany and I didn't see any Hitler statues. But I have been around the South and there are Confederate statues all over the place. And people have recently started putting up statues, terrible statues, Confederate statues, because other statues are being taken down. But again, we have books. We have the History Channel. We have things like museums. We have many different ways to learn about history. Don't agree, Kevin. What don't you agree with, Green Room? I'd like to know. That we should have separation of church and state. Here's another book. This is called We the People. Thank you, Kevin Lee Daughter. And it is all full of history. There's something about bureaucracy. It's full of how this country works. You can learn stuff like, here's something I want to show you, B-Dog. Let's just go to, let me find a chapter here. I'm just looking for a chapter heading. Give me a second. Okay, there are no statutes about interest groups and lobbyists, and yet we know about interest groups and lobbyists. How do we know? Because we have words. Statue without words is just a guy. I honestly, if I saw a statue of Roger Williams, and I know they're out there, I've never been to Rhode Island, if I saw a statue of Roger Williams, I wouldn't recognize him. But with the book, am I getting through it all here? Green Room, what don't you agree with? Kids ask. Kids ask about statues? Oh, you learned, in Dublin, you've learned a lot about the statues in our country. Okay. Yes, you can learn things from statues, Green Room. You absolutely can. And maybe there are those who think that we need to keep the Confederate statues up so we can learn all about things that they did that were wrong. But you can also have statues in museums in places where they can be in context rather than in the center of a park in front of City Hall. And a lot of these Confederate statues were placed there in the 50s and 60s to put the black folk into their place. So they knew who was really running things. The black folk get their vote, get uppity? No problem. We're just going to erect a statue in City Hall. That's why those statues are there. Some statues have been around for 100 years, especially all over the South. But many places in the South, many of those statues are brand new. I want to say John Oliver did something about it a long time ago. You can look that up, but I think it was a good piece. Whatever. Let's see. Nelson's Pillar, yeah, or as I knew it as a child because I lived in Africa, they called it Nelson's Willie, which is a dirty thing to say for the British. We don't call them Willies here, but having the last name Williams, that worked out well for me as a child in school, in the British school system. Who cares about statues, really? Yeah, I don't know. Okay, you're dealing with a Trumper when the person is baffled by the concept of books. Yeah, I know. I don't even know if he's in here anymore, but it's always fun when a bleacher joins the parade. Willie, no, just Willy, I think, Lizzie. Although, I can't swear to that. Okay. Yeah, I was called Kevin Willie on a regular basis, but, okay. I got over it. Okay, let's go back in the chat room here. Yeah, I also have, Noel, I also have mixed feelings about the Christopher Columbus statue being toppled. You have to take a look at the person within the context of their time. At the time, Christopher Columbus was like, hey, I'm going to find another trade route. He was just being a marketer, basically. And there's still questions about whether he actually believed the Earth was flat or round, or most people believed it was round. But, the trouble with books is the winners write them. So, I don't know. Roger could have been a complete a-hole. I have no idea. Anyway, I don't think there's going to be anything else today. I'm going to do a Billy Joel thing probably later. Also, I have to choose a theme song for an opening. It's going to be a very short opening, and I think I've got it picked out. I've got to put the video in there for the live stream, and we've got more openings to do, but I do want some input from you guys on what sort of music works with the opening. So I think what I'll do is I'll put together 2 or 3 music beds for the opening, and then you guys can help choose the theme song. So maybe later today. It depends. I've got some other stuff to do to update you on stuff. I've been calling both California unemployment and Washington unemployment multiple times, and what happens is you get a message saying, oh, our hours are this, blah, 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 blah. And especially with the California, when it goes for about a minute and a half, and then it says, we're very busy right now. We can't take your call. Click, and it hangs up on you. So you can't even stay on hold with California or Washington. My friend David sent me something earlier today saying Washington has 90,000 cases in backlog. That's for a state with, I don't know, like 10 million, 12 million people. 90,000 cases, still undecided. And they hope to, within the next 3 weeks, get through about half of them. And then the other half is just whenever. They have no idea. So all of that system's working out well. Yay, government. Okay, there's new messages. Give me a second, folks. And we have to get to We Didn't Start the Fire. We have to get to the parody of that. You're absolutely right, Noel. Flat earthers all over the globe. We could use some polka music. You know what? We could have multiple music beds for the opening. I don't know, but I like a consistent theme. Because when I think of the Colbert Report or The Daily Show or Bill Maher or whatever, there's Last Week Tonight. The themes for those, I can recall those themes because I've watched them enough time, and there's a connection there. Music is how we feel emotion, basically. It has to do with all the hormones in the frontal lobe and stuff like that. I don't want to get into it. A nasty heavy metal lying song. There are a couple of, we've done the the closing credits song. I kind of like it. Some people don't. Some people like the last closing credit song we had with the sort of the epic movie theme one. But this is for an opening, and the opening's only going to be like 3 or 4 or 5 seconds long because typically what happens with the live stream is I'm sitting here watching a feed from C-SPAN come through, and then somebody walks out, and I have to get going with it right away. There's really no time for the opening, but I'd like to have an opening. The theme from Rocky. Yeah, the Daily Show theme is cool. It used to be much cooler when it was Jon Stewart. This has nothing to do with Trevor Noah. I just really enjoyed the theme a lot better when it was the Jon Stewart theme. And the same thing with Real Time with Bill Maher. The old Real Time theme, so much better than the new one, because the old Real Time theme had like a thumping dun 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 dun, and the new one is just, it's pretty blasé compared to the old one, quite frankly. So, Bill, if you're watching, hey, how are you? Okay, you love the credits song? Yeah, a lot of people do. So anyway, I'll put together some of those. By the way, guys, I can't use no quarter for the jobless. Yeah, it'll be fourth quarter by the time they get to mine. At which point they'll be like, oh, we're out of unemployment money. So thanks very much. After the collapse of the complete economy. Or the complete collapse of the economy. Ann says the Washington ESD hangs up on me too, even to report fraud. Really? They did send me an email a couple days ago about all of fraud. So there's fraud in all the states, but Washington was especially hard hit. People who had jobs had their information stolen from somewhere. I mean, all our information's out there. And people were filing fake unemployment claims. And because at the beginning, Washington was very liberal with their, hey, everybody will get the 600. Hey, we'll take care. Even if we're not sure if we're going to claim it, approve the claim or not, we're going to pay everybody, which was a great idea, except that people who wanted to commit fraud found out about that and decided they were going to take all the money. Oh, John Oliver's on Sky UK, is he? I like when he can't show the parliamentary procedures in the UK, so you guys get a different feed than we do, because you guys can't show the parliament. We have C-SPAN. You guys are not allowed to show the parliament on television. It's very strange. Can't use Macho Man. I can't use any song that is a copyrighted song, so that is the problem. But I do have a wealth of songs in a library that I can use, that I actually pay for, pennies on the dollar, including the credit songs that I've used so far and some other stuff that I've used. But we'll take a look at them later. Right now, I'm going to go eat some lunch. It's 12:30 here. You guys have a wonderful day, the rest of it. Yeah, I know that a lot of people, the Rolling Stones, have told Trump that he can't use their song anymore. Who cares? He's just not going to do it. The one thing about Trump, more than anything else that bothers me, is that, so what? That's the attitude towards everything. You can't defraud the American people by paying $130,000 to a porn star to keep quiet before the... So what? So what? Well, you're an unindicted co-conspirator. So what? You've been impeached. So what? So, I mean, yes, he complains and he cries and he's a little slow flake and he runs down to the bunker. But what we've discovered from the Trump presidency is that there are no checks and balances in the system. If you've got a Republican Senate, do whatever the hell you want. Nominate judges who have been disapproved? Is that even the right? Who the Bar Association has looked at and said they would be a terrible judge. Doesn't matter. If they donated to the Trump campaign, nominate them, send them through. And the Senate that's filled with lawyers, the Republicans just pass it on through. Anyway, I'm going to let you guys go. Here is the closing credit song that we have currently. If you like that song, keep that in mind. I think it's a little too long for the opening, unfortunately. I mean, I can cut it down for length. Anyway, I don't know if it'll work. You guys have a great day, and we might see you later with some theme songs to pick out.